No. I think the ayes have it. Moved to question time. Are there any questions?
Good. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, prior to the last election, Labor promised a $275 cut to power bills on nearly 100 occasions. Since the election, you've never mentioned it. Last week, the government promised a return to industry-wide bargaining, which will mean more strikes and it will drive up the costs of living for families in our country. Why are Australian families paying the price for the Prime Minister's new priorities?
I call the Prime Minister.
Tactics couldn't agree.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his questions, spraying across the range of issues because they can't decide which tactic to land on. So perhaps one of those was from the Liberal Party and one from the National Party. A bit like last week when they couldn't agree whether they should attend the Jobs and Skills Summit. A bit like that. So some were in, some were out. But there is a common theme. There is a common theme, which is that for those opposite seek to forget the fact that they've just been in government for almost a decade. They think that 21st of May was ground zero. They think that 21st of May was when the Federation was formed. But in fact, in March, those opposite sat on an increase in wholesale electricity prices. They sat on it, and consistent with their attitude and their approach towards transparency in government, they didn't tell anyone. They didn't tell anyone. Because it's not surprising that they didn't tell anyone, because we know now they didn't have one energy minister, did they? They didn't have one. So perhaps one of the energy ministers knew exactly what was occurring. But nonetheless, the people who didn't know were the Australian people. The people who didn't know were the Australian people. And then they have the hide. Then they have the hide to come in here and ask a sort of incoherent babble of a question. An incoherent babble of a question.
The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On relevance, the Australian public clearly heard you say and promised to them a $275 decrease in their electricity bills, and you have never mentioned it from that day to this.
The manager. I call the Prime Minister. Order. The Leader of the Opposition has made his point of order, which I heard in silence.
Can I ask you to withdraw that last comment?
The Prime Minister has asked the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw a comment. I didn't hear the comment, but I'll ask him to withdraw.
The comment was he lied to people, and I'm happy to withdraw.
No. Order. The Leader of the House. Order. Members on my left. The Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, no one is above the principle, which is all the way through practice, that when you're asked to withdraw, you do so unconditionally. That you just always actually, Whenever asked to withdraw, but I was asked to withdraw very rarely. He gets asked to withdraw a lot.
Order.
It should be you don't repeat what was said. You simply withdraw. It should be the same rule for everybody. As I know, Mr. Speaker, you've always enforced that sort of behaviour. The House should be better then.
To assist the House, to assist the running of the House, I ask the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw. Thank you. I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. What we did was December last year put out a coherent policy. A coherent policy after a decade of inaction, after 22 policy announcements, and none of them delivered. But what we know is that there was a 23rd, and the 23rd policy was put up in March of an increase that they are responsible for, which came into effect because it was deliberately delayed by the then government until after the election. We stand by our modelling that we put out. We stand by the fact that
opposition business.
Renewables are the cheapest form of new energy. and it's not really sort of rocket science. You don't really need an economics degree or a science degree to know that if the market changes from a more expensive level of energy to a cheaper level of energy, you get cheaper energy prices. I know that might be beyond those opposite, but that's exactly what the Australian people know. That's why they got solar panels on their roofs.
Time has expired. Order. I give the call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Jobs and Skills Summit brought together 140 leaders from business, government, unions and civil society to find common ground on our economic challenges. What are some of the outcomes of the summit, and how will everyday Australians benefit?
Call the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for Cunningham for her question. I congratulate her on her first speech to the parliament just before question time, and I look forward to her making an outstanding contribution for the people of the Illawarra. The Jobs and Skills Summit exceeded, I think, everyone's expectations. The fact is that it was a resounding success that changed the whole mood of politics and the way that it's conducted. We brought together business, unions, community leaders, people from across the political spectrum, with one little group accepted, but all those who are interested in creating a fair wage, strong growth, high productivity economy going forward. All those who understood that the skills crisis is something that's developed over the last decade that needs addressing. All those who understood that enterprise bargaining at the moment isn't working to lift productivity, and it's not working to lift wages either. And as a result of the cooperative approach, we came up with 36 concrete outcomes, including $1.1 billion in additional federal and state funding for fee-free TAFE from 2023. Just for the next financial year, 180,000 places. And I thank the premiers and chief ministers from throughout the country, from across the political spectrum, who joined with us in that. A permanent migration program increased to 195,000, allowing student visa holders to work more and clearing the visa backlog that this government inherited, where there are 1 million people waiting for their visas, an additional 500 workers being there. More flexibility in the National Housing Infrastructure Facility to encourage private sector and superannuation investment, making an enormous difference going forward. Across the board, there was a constructive approach. People came and didn't just try to dig a deeper trench in the same old battlefield. People put aside their differences. They participated constructively. It will be remembered and contrasted with the 1983 summit, where there was just one woman represented. This time round it was 50-50 representation. 50-50 representation. The summit showed that bringing people together, the premiers and chief ministers, business, unions, the Business Council, COSBOA, sitting down with unions, sitting down with workers is constructive. And I think Jennifer Westacott summed it up when she said, I think the summit has been a great opportunity to reset and to really seize the future. It's a pity some of those opposite don't want to be a part of the future.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. Give a call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the Prime Minister's captain's call to invite CFMEU boss Christy Kane to his union talkfest. Mr Kane has previously been charged with common assault, has described John Setka as one of the most fair dinkum people in this country, and on Thursday said, if you're not at the table, you're part of the menu. Will the Prime Minister apologise for inviting this misogynist thug, or was it payback for millions in dirty CFMEU donations?
Order. Call the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her question about the fact that there were trade unionists at the Jobs and Skills Summit. The fact that there were trade unionists. We had representatives from the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation at the summit. They were the people who stood on the front line of the pandemic. The people who protected people in the health sector. We heard from the United Workers Union about the work that took place in terms of childcare during the pandemic. We heard from them about the need to deal with skills shortages. We heard from unions in the tech sector about the work that was required there. We heard
Order. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, it is again on relevance. All of those unions who were there had a legitimate reason to be there, are good people. This question is about the thugs at the CFMEU that go around breaking arms, go around with all sorts of misogynistic behaviour, and this Prime Minister won't make...
The Manager of Opposition, the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I just refer to your earlier warnings to the Leader of the Opposition in terms of points of order that are clearly not points of order.
The Prime Minister is in order, and I ask him to return to the question.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm asked a question about union representation at the Jobs and Skills Summit, and I'm answering that question because at the summit they brought together Business Council representatives, they brought together union representatives, and not everyone at the summit. The big tip here. Everyone at the summit, when you bring 140 people together, you mightn't agree with the comments of every single one of the 140. But what you do is you bring people together in a constructive way. And that's why peak groups like Innes Willix from AIG, Jennifer Westacott, Fiona Simpson, Tanya Constable, Anna Bligh, John Davies, Simon Butt, Alexi
will
Boyd.
Just take a break. The Manager of Opposition Business, and I'd ask him to state the point of order.
Defying your ruling. You asked him to return to the question.
There's no point.
This is about the CFMEU.
There's no point of order. The question was about unions attending the, in your words, the Talkfest, the Job Summit. Now, call the Prime Minister to be in order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, I don't want to take issue with your interpretation of the question, but as you know, the question didn't make a reference to general unionists who were there. And I quote the Deputy Leader, Mr Speaker, I refer to the Prime Minister's captain's calls to invite militant unionists from the CFMEU, Christy McCain.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for this.
That is specific, Mr Speaker.
I ask you to resume your seat. If you wish to talk about one union, don't refer to Union Talkfest in your question. And I call the Prime Minister.
They're confused. They're confused, Mr Speaker. They're confused. And they even changed. Mr Speaker.
I didn't hear what the Leader of the Opposition said. Order. I'm asking for silence in the chamber so I can hear the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. I call the Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr Speaker. The fact is that at the conference, attended by a cross range of people over 2 days. I mean, at the dinner I was sitting on my right was Anthony Pratt, on my left was Alexi Boyd, the head of the Council of Small Business. And it was a real opportunity for people to gather in a constructive way, to engage in dialogue with each other in a positive way.
I just asked the Prime Minister to take a break. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and I need her to state the standing order directly she'll be referring to.
Tedious repetition, Mr Speaker, and a failure to talk about the CFMEU.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. There is far too many points of order during questions, and I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, the Leader of the Opposition has given two different names for the gentleman concerned when he repeated the question. But the fact is, we had representatives from the Victorian Trades Hall, the HSU, the AEU, the nurses and midwives,
the Prime Minister's time has concluded. I give the call to the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. What were the outcomes of the Albanese Government's Jobs and Skills Summit, and how will they help address Australia's economic challenges?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Macon for his question. The reason the Jobs and Skills Summit was such a resounding success was that people were prepared to come from all parts of our economy and all corners of our country to come together around some of the big economic challenges that we confront. People there at the summit from right across the country, right across the economy and most parts of the parliament, they know and they understand that it's time to draw a line under the divisive decade of missed opportunities and warped priorities which has made our economy weaker and our people poorer as a consequence.
I ask the Treasurer to resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, there was no reference in the question to the records of a past government. We're 30 seconds in and he can't stop himself from getting into an attack on this side. Now, you need to ask him to address the terms of the question, which were what were the outcomes of the Jobs and Skills Summit and how will they help address Australia's economic challenges.
I thank the Manager for his point of order. The question was also about the issues and the economic challenges, and I call the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Speaker. One of the outcomes of the Jobs and Skills Summit was to draw a line under a divisive decade of missed opportunities and warped priorities, which have made the economy weaker and our people poorer. And I want to thank everybody who participated in that summit, who came there not seeking unanimity but seeking common ground. And we found that common ground, and we are now ready to move forward together. Now, we wanted the summit to achieve at least three things. First of all, to bring people together around those big challenges. Secondly, to agree on some proposals for immediate action. And thirdly, to set a clear direction for future work. And that, Mr Speaker, is exactly what happened. And on Friday, we released an outcomes document that came from the conversations and from the consensus that we achieved at the summit. At the centre of that is maintaining full employment in a way that benefits more of our people. At the centre of it was improving productivity growth at the end of the worst decade for productivity in 50 years. We came together to deal with the labour shortages and the skills shortages, which are acting as a handbrake on our economy. We came together to boost wages, to get wages growing again after a decade of deliberate wage stagnation and wage suppression. We came together to invest in the industries and in the jobs which will deliver the opportunities for our people into the future. Now, to help do all this, the outcomes included 36 initiatives that we're taking immediate action on, including boosting investment in fee-free TAFE, boosting the amount that pensioners can earn from work, beginning the work to repair the broken bargaining system, which has been a key contributor to wage stagnation for too long, responsibly increasing the permanent migration target to address the labour shortages which are affecting all Australians. And all of these areas are about responding to our economic challenges. That's what the summit was about, and that's what the government is about. At the summit, Australians saw us working together to tackle these challenges. Employers and unions, premiers and chief ministers, the Australian of the Year, the Leader of the Nationals, the crossbenchers, all prepared to seek that common ground and to have a go and not have a whinge. And in that regard, the Leader of the Opposition was left out, wallowing in his own irrelevance.
Order. I give the call to the member for Griffith.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, there are almost 2 million households in mortgage stress and 2.7 million Australians in rental stress, with 1 million of those paying more than 50% of their income on rent. Many are one rent increase away from eviction or homelessness. Prime Minister, will you put aside your own status as a landlord and put the Greens' proposal for a 2-year rent freeze and an interest rate pause on the agenda for the next meeting of the National Cabinet?
I call the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, and I am very pleased that I'm back in public housing. It's got to be said. a lot better than my first public house. But the fact is that a range of people are certainly under stress in terms of housing affordability, finding it difficult to get into the housing market and finding it difficult to pay the rent and pay the bills. And that's why we have a Housing Australia Future Fund, because we recognise that what we need to do is to have a comprehensive plan to deal with housing issues in this country. We have our Housing Australia Future Fund that will create 30,000 additional social housing units. And indeed on Thursday and Friday at the summit, we had one of the initiatives was to use the National Housing Infrastructure Facility to encourage investment in affordable housing from the private sector and from superannuation funds. This is a fund of some $575 million, where we will hope to leverage that fund in order to attract investment from those, including the superannuation sector, who are looking for those long-term returns. That is why it makes sense to use that facility, and it's another initiative. On top of that, we have our $100 million additional that we will put into emergency housing. We know that too many people get turned away from emergency housing, particularly victims of family violence. Too many women and children are turned away each and every day. So we'll take these policies seriously. I'd say to the Greens political party that they could do a lot better if they could point to one area in one time in my constituency or others in which they actually supported an affordable housing strategy, in which they supported the sort of plans that have been put in place with cooperation of private sector and public sector, particularly local government, and that would be a good thing. But I'd welcome his support in the Inner West Council, but in others as well, where Greens representatives have consistently voted against projects like the project right next to Marrickville Station, where they said we couldn't have medium density housing there, and voted against the project, even though what it did was give people in affordable housing an opportunity to get to work right from that train line at Marrickville.
Order. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are Her Excellency Dame Annette King, High Commissioner for New Zealand, and the Honourable Andrew Little, Minister for Health in the New Zealand Parliament. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you both. And I give the call to the honourable member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Social Services. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to help Australian pensioners deal with the cost of living?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you very much for the call, Speaker, and I thank the member for Gilmore for the question. I know the member for Gilmore has been a strong advocate for pensioners in her electorate. Of course, this government knows that pensioners and those on social security payments are facing cost of living pressures. And that's why it's so important as a government we give them every little bit of help we can. Today, our government has announced extra cost of living relief for those on security payments, social security payments. Under this announcement from the 20th of September, 4.7 million Australians will receive a much-needed boost to their payments.
The member for Deakin.
This will be the largest increase to allowances in more than 30 years for allowances and, of course, the largest increase in 12 years for pensioners. It will also apply to rent assistance. This means that the maximum rate of the pension for single pensioners will increase to $1,026.50. And, of course, for a couple, it will be $1,547.60 for a couple of pensioners. Of course, this is an important step to attack the cost of living pressures and support those on pensions and social security payments. But, of course, This is just the beginning of what we as a government in our short time in office have been working towards. Of course, we took immediate action to freeze the deeming rates for 2 years for pensioners as of July, and this will ease the cost of living pressure for so many pensioners. Of course, we have a bill in front of the Senate ensuring 50,000 more older Australians will get the benefit from the Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card. And of course, at the Jobs and Skills Summit last week, the Prime Minister announced an important boost to the Pensioner Income Bank, ensuring that pensioners can earn more before they lose their pension. This has been an incredibly welcomed initiative that many pensioner groups and others have welcomed. Of course, I'm hearing interjections from those on the other side, and of course they've been trying to suggest that they've had some sort of idea to do this. Of course, they had 9 years in which to introduce their measures, 9 years where they sat on their hands and did nothing. It has taken the election of an Albanese government to bring people together at the Jobs Summit, explore ways we can help pensioners actually boost their income and actually turn that into action. That is so much more than the rhetoric from the other side. With no action over 9 years, pensioners are pleased that this government is in charge and taking action to help them with cost of living.
Has concluded. Order. I give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer guarantee that industry-wide bargaining and industrial action will not raise the cost of living for Australians?
Call the Treasurer.
Look, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I just need to check, are we writing these questions for the member for Hume? Because asking a question about wages and the cost of living after a decade of deliberate wage suppression and wage stagnation under those opposite. The changes that we are working through in consultation with employers and with unions and with the broader Australian community is about seeking more and better agreements and not more conflict. Now, if those opposite had their way, Mr Speaker, we would have another decade of stagnant wages and ordinary working Australians falling further and further behind. Our efforts at the Jobs Summit, whether it's in the Minister for Industrial Relations area or in all of the areas that we have paid such close attention to, is about getting wages moving again in this economy. The defining failure of those opposite and the dregs of the former government which sit before me are that wages for a decade barely shifted, and that meant that ordinary Australian people—
The Treasurer will resume his seat. Order. Members on my right. Members on my right, I will hear the Shadow Treasurer in silence. I give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Relevance. It was a very specific question about the impact of industrial action on the cost of living, not wages.
All right. I thank the member for Hume. The Treasurer is in order. It was a fairly wide question containing a number of issues, particularly regarding bargaining, and I'll call the Treasurer to order.
For too long in this economy, Mr Speaker, ordinary Australians and their living standards have been going backwards. And that's because those opposite, over almost a decade in office, deliberately went after people's wages and job security and working conditions. They even admitted in a burst of candour that low wages was a deliberate design feature of their economic policy, and we take a different approach. We take a different approach to wages. We think that stagnant wages are a defining feature of the failure of those opposite to manage the economy in the interests of working people. And what we want to do, what the Jobs Summit was about, what our government is about, what our Prime Minister is about, what our Cabinet is about getting wages moving again in this economy, because people find it too difficult to keep up with the skyrocketing costs of living. And so the changes that we are consulting on, the changes which were discussed at the Jobs and Skills Summit, are all about looking for more agreement, not more conflict. We want to get wages moving again. We think that's the best way for Australians to deal with the substantial cost of living pressures that they face. Now, I understand, Mr Speaker, that when the Shadow Treasurer demanded an invite to the Jobs and Skills Summit, I know that it was humiliating for him when Mum and Dad said he couldn't go to the former. I know that it was humiliating for them, but that doesn't excuse the kinds of rubbish questions which attempt to kind of whitewash and gloss over the fact that those opposite were responsible for a decade of stagnant wages. And we think something has to change when it comes to wages in this country, because we don't want to cop ordinary working people going further and further and further behind. There's an appetite in this country to get wages moving again. We want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. If you lot had your way, we'd have another decade of wage stagnation and ordinary Australian working people copping it in the neck.
Give the call to the member for Cornwall.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. How will the outcomes of the Jobs and Skills Summit, the budget and the government's broader economic plan help address cost of living pressures?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Might do. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for her question about the cost of living. I think we all appreciate and understand that Australians in every corner of our country are doing it especially tough right now, that the cost of living pressures are acute and the cost of some of the essentials that Australians just can't do without are going through the roof. Now, part of this, obviously, is about global pressures, particularly on energy markets and when it comes to food security. Clearly, there are some domestic attributes there as well, some of the supply chain issues, which were a feature of the discussion at the Jobs and Skills Summit last week, are part of the challenge as well. And I think that there is an expectation right across the board that rising interest rates are set to be an even bigger part of the pain that people confront. Now, tomorrow the Reserve Bank Board will meet again, and we don't preempt or interfere in any way with their independent decisions, but the market expectations are for another increase, and that will be an additional cost on people who are paying off a mortgage. Now, the task for government, the task for our government, is to do what we responsibly can to help people through these shorter-term challenges, but also to deal with the issues in supply chains, to deal with cost of living where we can, and build an economy that grows wages and improves living standards over time. And that's why it's so important that the payments that the minister mentioned a moment ago will increase this month in line with inflation. It's why we successfully argued for an increase in the minimum wage in line with inflation, despite the howls of opposition from those opposite. That's why our October budget will cut the price of medicines. It's why I've instructed the ACCC to step up and maximise their surveillance of fuel markets to make sure savings in petrol prices are passed on and motorists are getting a fair deal when the excise relief comes off. And it's why we're delivering long-term reforms to deal with some of those supply chain issues, deal with the skills crisis we were left with, to lift the speed limit on the economy. And that means cheaper childcare, a game-changing investment to ease the cost of living but also deliver an economic dividend. It means investing in cleaner and cheaper energy, investing in free TAFE, growing the care economy, advanced manufacturing and other key sectors of the economy. And the Jobs and Skills Summit was a really crucial part of this work. It focused on improving productivity. We know that grows wages. Focus on skills, focus on breaking down the barriers to employment that too many people still face, and focusing on fixing a broken bargaining system that has only delivered wage stagnation. Now again, Mr Speaker, while the government works on these serious cost of living pressures that Australian families face, we invited those opposite to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. They rejected that because if they had their way, there'd be another decade of the same cost of living pressures and wage stagnation that they've subjected the Australian people.
I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture. How many of the 1 million foot and mouth disease vaccinations promised to Indonesia on the 14th of July have now been administered to livestock?
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you very much for the question. And as you know, this government has been in office for 100 days and has actually implemented a program to actually prevent foot and mouth disease coming into this country. And as you know, as I've said to previous questions before, in order to make sure we are able to deliver vaccines to Indonesia, to assist them to get on top of this, and it is in our country's interest to ensure that that actually occurs, that we need to make sure that we can actually ensure that we've got the right viral load. We know what we're actually doing in relation to that, and we can deliver it. In terms of the In terms of the actual number, I will come back to the minister. In terms of the actual number, in terms of that. But what I would remind the minister of, that on the 11th of May, you knew that foot and mouth disease would be an issue in this country, and you did.
I call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Very specific question. The minister's just admitted she doesn't know the answer. She should sit down. We've heard enough.
As the minister concluded, the minister has concluded her answer. Give the call. I give the call to the member for Fraser.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. How will the government's work bonus incentive for pensioners assist eligible veterans? How does it vary previous policy settings?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Speaker, and I thank the member for Fraser for asking this very important question. I thank him for shining a light on this important issue, as well as providing an opportunity to clarify some of the statements made by the member for Hume earlier today. Because this Albanese Labor government is committed to improving and adapting to the needs of currently serving defence personnel, veterans and families. That's why I'm proud that a key initiative from last week's Jobs and Skills Summit goes exactly to that aged and veteran pensioners will be able to earn an additional $4,000 over this financial year without losing any of their pension, due to the Albanese Labor government providing a one-off income credit designed to give older Australians the option to work and keep more of their money. I'm very concerned that the member for Hume seems not to understand this policy, given his statement today in the media that apparently we excluded veterans. Well, I'm prepared to give the member for Hume the benefit of the doubt. After all, we should err towards incompetence over conspiracy. To assist the member for Hume, if he turns to the very first line of the media release from the Prime Minister when announcing this policy, it says age and veterans pensioners. The policy announced on Friday in relation to the work bonus bank includes veterans and dependents who receive the service pension. That's the age service pension, the partner service pension, or the income support supplement paid to war widows or wholly dependent partners and are overqualifying age. Now, the Australian community has a clear expectation that veterans and their families will be well looked after. We are committed to delivering a package of practical support measures that will improve the welfare and well-being of veterans and families, building on the services already available. In preparation for last week's Jobs and Skills Summit, I've been meeting with businesses, veterans, recruitment agencies and ex-service organisations to develop a Veterans Employment White Paper. One of the key outcomes of those meetings is the need to support veterans in the civilian workforce, not just as they transition immediately after service, but later in life as well. The policy announced on Friday will enable veterans to do more work to earn more money before they start losing their pension, which serves two purposes. At a time of serious skills shortage, it seems we can get access through this measure to more skilled labour. Importantly, it will also make it easier for veterans to go back or remain in the workplace while receiving their pension. In addition to the increased income this provides them, it's great for their mental health as well, because it means they can remain mentally engaged and giving back to their communities. This is a win-win, and it is something that, despite their rhetoric now, those opposite failed to deliver in nearly a decade in office. What this means is that a veteran on the service pension now could take any job, like, for example, they might want to work at a local steakhouse and they could serve the member for Hume a well-done Angus.
Order. I think I know where the Manager of Opposition Business is going. I remind— Order. Order. We had this issue arise last week of Parliament. Can I ask all ministers, when referring to members, by their correct title? It's happened. Order. It's happened twice. It won't happen again. I give the call to the member for Hughes.
My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. I refer to media reports of the minister's letter to the Fair Work Commission, welcomed by the New South Wales Rail, Tram and Bus Union. Can the minister explain to the House why he has intervened in the New South Wales rail dispute in support of unions and further strikes?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. First of all, it's not unusual for ministers for workplace relations to write to the Fair Work Commission. Not unusual at all. Not unusual for them to write to the Fair Work Commission in order to update the Fair Work Commission on what's happening with legislation. Later today, we will debate the Family and Domestic Violence Leave Bill. The Fair Work Commission received 2 letters from me in advance of that coming to the House, letting them know because it had an impact on their workload. It's completely a normal thing to do. In fact, Andrew Stewart, the professor, fellow of the Australian Academy of Law, said only today, well, there's nothing unusual or inappropriate about the minister writing to the Fair Work Commission to indicate there are going to be some changes to the law which will potentially affect the way in which the Commission does its work. That's something that actually happens quite routinely. The difference, though, between the letters and correspondence that used to go to the Fair Work Commission and what goes to the Fair Work Commission now is a big difference. So when, for example, the former Minister Christian Porter wrote to the Fair Work Commission, he wrote to them to be able to cut penalty rates. That was how he wrote to them. When each time came round so I've written 4 times. I've written to them with respect to the annual wage review, the aged care wage review, family and domestic violence leave, and with respect to unilateral termination of agreements. On all 4 times, none of those are letters that the previous government would have written. I get that, because all of them advanced wages and conditions. Every single one. And did so, particularly with the annual wage review and the aged care review, did so in areas that disproportionately helped narrow the gender pay gap. Both of them. So with respect to the specific letter that the member asks about, first of all, I don't know what application from the New South Wales government she's referring to, because there isn't one on that issue. It actually doesn't exist, so I'm not exactly sure what I'm meant to be intervening on. But if you look at the timing of this versus the timing of the letters that went with respect to family and domestic violence leave, on each case, the Fair Work Commission was advised once the decision of government had been made. That is the respectful thing to do. That's the appropriate thing to do. Those opposite might not be used to concepts where people are notified of something that is relevant to them. I'm sure Josh would have loved a letter being told, by the way, I'm Treasurer too. I'm sure there's a whole lot of notification, that respectful notification, that those opposite think maybe that should have happened previously. But what has happened here is completely orderly and the right thing to do.
Order. I give the call to the member for Bennelong.
My question is to the Minister for Small Business. How has the Albanese Labor government ensured small businesses were an integral part of the Jobs and Skills Summit, and how will they benefit from the outcomes?
Give the call to the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for his very important question. As I've said in this place before, small businesses really are the engine room of our economy. Indeed, they do employ millions of Australians and contribute more than $400 billion to our economy. And we're already delivering for small businesses, but we know that there's significant economic and employment challenges that they continue to face. We know that they've had a tough few years, with fire, floods, the pandemic, but they've been incredibly resilient, Mr Speaker, and it was important that they had a role to play in terms of the Jobs and Skills Summit. In the lead-up to the Jobs and Skills Summit, I hosted several roundtables, and I want to thank and put on the record my thanks to the Council of Small Business of Australia, the Small Business Ombudsman, and indeed the Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the HIA for hosting those roundtables for me in the lead-up to the Jobs and Skills Summit. And at those roundtables, what we heard, of course, was about the skill shortages. What we heard was about supply chain issues. What we heard was about the issues and the inherited $1 trillion of debt that we've got, and of course increasing energy costs and inflation and how they're impacting on small businesses. And of course, some of the outcomes of the Jobs and Skills Summit for small businesses are really important to address some of those, particularly when it comes to the migration program and increasing skilled labour. We know that these small businesses have been screaming out for more skilled labour. We also know that the visa backlog has been impacting the small businesses, so that is a really important and welcome decision. We know, of course, the establishment of Jobs and Skills Australia has been really welcomed by small businesses because they understand that the only way to deal with the skills shortages long-term is to have better training and skills for Australians to be able to meet those shortages. Our fee-free TAFE announcement was critical for the small businesses, 180,000 places in the first year to be able to share with states and territories in implementing that. And of course, we've heard about the aged pensioners with a temporary upfront $4,000 income bank credit to allow them to work more. And we've, of course, welcomed the agreement between COSBOA and the employees' representatives, the unions. It's great to see workers and small businesses come together on an agreement that the current enterprise bargaining system is not working for the small businesses, nor is it working for the employees. Indeed, this agreement is really important for all of those people working in small businesses and all of the small businesses and small business owners. Indeed, these measures build on what we're already delivering as part of our election commitments. We're building on our Commonwealth procurement changes, our unfair contract terms legislation that will be being introduced to Parliament. We want to continue to work with small business and stand up for small business, and it was great to talk to the small businesses that were in the room last week at the Jobs and Skills Summit.
Order. I give the call to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. In order to reach and exceed the government's 43% emission reduction target, all sectors of our economy must adapt, including how we fund infrastructure projects like the Western Harbour Tunnel and the Beaches Link in my electorate of North Sydney. Will the minister make infrastructure funding for projects such as these contingent on a project delivering a carbon base case which would track and limit emissions over the life cycle of the project from design through to construction?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the independent member for North Sydney for the question and also her interest in the contribution that infrastructure makes and can make to achieving net zero. It does have a substantial contribution that it can make, and I thank you for your interest in it. I am aware of the proposal from Infrastructure Partnerships Australia to introduce a carbon base case for infrastructure projects and programs over $100 million, and I want to work with industry and with others who have ideas in this space to implement new ways that we can work towards achieving our goal of achieving 43% reduction of emissions by 2030. I understand that there is no current, accurate and consistent way across the country to actually estimate the carbon base case for infrastructure projects, and I am happy to receive proposals and also very happy to work with others in this House collaboratively in industry to explore ways in which we can actually get to that and increase the sustainability of our infrastructure investments. And in fact, that's exactly what happened when Labor was last in office. When the Prime Minister held this portfolio, he invested in seed funding to the infrastructure sustainability rating scheme that was established, the first one that ever had been established, and that's an independent rating framework that's still used to help assess the sustainability of our infrastructure and the performance of our infrastructure across the nation. And at the last Infrastructure and Transport Ministers' meeting, this is actually on the agenda, and again we agreed to explore further how governments across Australia can consider the carbon base case and establish a consistent measurement of embedded carbon within infrastructure projects. Across my portfolio, obviously in terms of both transport and infrastructure, we have a lot we can contribute to net zero. It did surprise me, maybe it won't surprise others here, but there wasn't actually anywhere within the Department of Infrastructure and Transport where we were actually working on net zero and decarbonising the infrastructure and transport portfolio. Surprisingly, I have asked my secretary to establish a unit within the department to start doing that. We will be establishing that net zero unit within the portfolio. I'm also undertaking a number of important initiatives across the portfolio, including the aviation white paper that will look at this issue, the Jet Zero Council to actually establish a sustainable aviation fuels in this country as well. But I do thank you for the question and your interest in infrastructure.
I thank the minister. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government working to promote economic growth and address the skills shortage crisis it has inherited?
I give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, I'd like to first thank the member for Macarthur for his interest in this area and the question, and the fact that he's been a very strong advocate for TAFE and for vet sector in his community. And I'm very conscious of his long-standing involvement with Campbelltown and Macquarie Fields TAFE, who do a great job. And as we know, we need to provide more investment, more resources to the vet sector, and we need to reform the sector so it's fit for purpose, to provide the skills our labour market needs, to provide those skills that employers are crying out for, to provide the skills that workers deserve so they can have secure work and they can actually have a decent career progression because they have skills in demand. Wherever you look, Speaker, across the economy, you see skill shortages. Quite frankly, it is a skills crisis. Acute shortages in some sectors of the economy, whether it's aged care, disability care, whether it's nurses, GPs, especially in the regions, whether it's the tech industry that is crying out for more people to fill vacancies, traditional trades, boilermakers, electricians, plumbers, sectors like tourism, hospitality, retail. So there is almost no area of the economy that is not in need of skill supply, and for that reason the government is focusing on that issue. And can I say, it was a very good start, I think, when on the first day of the Jobs and Skills Summit the Prime Minister announced an investment in TAFE, 180,000 fee-free TAFE places for 2023. This is a great announcement, and it was, of course, one that was in partnership with every state and territory government in this country, an agreement that should have been struck well before the election by the previous government if they were focusing on these issues. Now, that investment will mean that not only people will be able to afford and access TAFE places in areas of skills shortage, but it will, of course, provide a pipeline, a supply of skills to the economy and labour market that is so much in need of that supply, and that is, of course, critical. Can I say too that the fact is 9 out of 10 new jobs over the next 5 years will require a post-school qualification, whether that's in universities or whether that's in vet. 4 of those every 10 places, jobs I should say, in the next 5 years will require at least a vocational qualification. That's why the investment in this area is so important. But we have to get, of course, it right, and that's why we'll establish Jobs and Skills Australia, which will in fact identify the skill shortages that are there now, but also, as importantly, identify the emerging areas of demand so when we invest billions of dollars we can supply the skills that are needed.
Mrs. Time has concluded. I give the call to the member for Page.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. The Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories has disclosed ownership of shares in 8 different companies and later sought to transfer them to her husband, something the code specifically prohibits. Prime Minister, is the minister in breach of the Prime Minister's Ministerial Code of Conduct?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'll ask the minister to supplement my answer, but I'm very satisfied. I'm very satisfied with the explanation that the minister gave me. The minister rang me about the circumstances. The minister is seeking to rectify that at the earliest possible opportunity, and that's the way that it should work. That's the way that it should work. Well, I'm not going to take lectures about transparency from those opposite, who didn't know who the Treasurer was, didn't know who the Finance Minister was, didn't know who the Energy and Science Minister was, didn't know the Health Minister was, who the Finance Minister, who has responsibility for signing off as the—
Order. The Prime Minister will just take a break. Order. The member for— Order. The Minister for Climate Change. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
It's on relevance, Mr. Speaker, a very specific question, and we're now trawling into the history of the previous government.
Call the Prime Minister.
One thing that didn't happen, Mr. Speaker, we didn't have to worry about someone being sworn into the Department of the Arts because there wasn't one. There wasn't one. But the truth is we won't take lectures on transparency from those opposite. We've been upfront about our position with regard to the Ministerial Code of Conduct. We're making sure that, unlike those opposite, there aren't any conflicts there, and I'd ask the Minister to supplement.
Call the Minister.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and I thank the member for the question because it is an important topic. After I was sworn in as a minister, I divested myself of shares by transferring them to my husband. On reviewing the Code of Conduct, and after making some additional inquiries, I realised that that was not an adequate form of divestment. My husband and I at all times fully intended to sell the shares. However, I am the first to admit that that should have taken place sooner. I take my responsibilities as a minister very seriously. We have now divested ourselves of all the shares to ensure that there is no conflict of interest. Since the shares are now sold, I consider the matter closed. At no point did I intend to deceive the parliament. I adequately disclosed as I was required to, unlike those opposite.
Order. I give the call. Order. Order. We will have some silence in the chamber. I give the call to the member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. How is the Albanese government lifting permanent migration to bring in the critical workers our economy desperately needs?
Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs.
I want to thank the member for Bean for his friendship and his brilliant advocacy for his community. And this is a matter which he's raised with me consistently because it is affecting the people that he represents as well as all of us in this chamber. Mr Speaker, on Thursday and Friday last week, the Prime Minister brought together groups of Australians from right across the country, from every possible corner of our country, to talk about some of the issues that matter most to us. And those 140 people came here, Mr Speaker, because, like the rest of Australia, they are desperate to draw a line under a decade in which nothing that really matters to us really got moved forward. Now, Speaker, some of the people who were in that room have been in conflict for decades. But we heard a really clear message from Australians at the election, and that is, as the Prime Minister said, they want us to get out of the trenches. They want us to work together because the issues that are facing our constituents are bigger than any of our political parties. Now, it was fantastic to have at the summit people like the leader of the National Party there making a contribution trying to defend and protect the interests of his constituents. The leader of the Australian Greens was there, the crossbench were there. Everyone except those opposite who are trying to make a difference to this country together in one conversation. Now, Speaker, we face a skills crisis which is very significantly affecting the lives of Australians. Speaker, we've got nurses in our community who have been pulling double and triple shifts for 2 years. They just can't do it anymore. We've got a teaching sector led by my friend the Minister for Education, where teachers are leaving the sector in droves because they just can't put up with the staffing shortages anymore. We've got people in the regional electorates represented around this chamber where fruit is rotting on vines because there is no one to go and pick it and get it onto supermarket shelves. Now, Speaker, of course, as Labor people, our focus is always in trying to get Australians into these jobs, and we do face a very special opportunity to bring people who have been marginalised from work into the workforce, and I want to thank the Minister for Social Services for her work on this. But even if we do all of those things, Speaker, we are going to have a shortfall of labour in this country of many, many thousands. And that's why a decision was made at the summit that this year's permanent skilled migration rate will lift from 160,000 people to 195,000 people. Speaker, it's going to mean thousands more nurses for our health system in this year. It's going to mean thousands more workers into our regions to help with the acute crises there. It will mean 31,000 workers to state and territory allocations going straight into our hospitals, our infrastructure projects and our schools. Speaker, what I really would have appreciated and what I think is in the spirit of the moment is full participation across this chamber. We didn't quite get there, but I want to thank everyone in this chamber who came along, who pulled the weight of the nation with them and worked together to get those great 36 outcomes that we got from the summit. Thank you.
I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to his previous answer. Prime Minister, was the matter considered by the Governance Committee, or was there any advice received from PM&C?
I call the Prime Minister.
As you'd expect, we don't talk about cabinet deliberations, and the Leader of the Opposition knows that that's the case, that it's actually impossible for me to answer a question about a cabinet.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
Seriously.
She's been constantly interjecting. The Minister for Climate Change is not helping. I call the Leader of the Opposition. And neither are those on my left. I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, it was a very tight and specific question. It didn't go to the deliberations, didn't go to anything other than
resume your seat.
The
Prime Minister is answering. The member for Page. The Prime Minister is answering the question.
It did go to the operations of a cabinet and a cabinet committee, which we do not answer those questions in this chamber. You actually wait and you'll get that. So apparently the Westminster system. Apparently,
the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has asked his question. He was heard in silence. I ensured that. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Apparently the Westminster system is alien to those opposite. But
the Leader of the Opposition.
But that's not surprising. Because I'll tell you the way that the Westminster system operates, and it's operated here since Federation. You have a cabinet. Then you have cabinet committees. But those opposite, of course, had a cabinet committee of one, with one member, so that they could avoid transparency, so that they could have discussions and say it was a meeting of the cabinet committee with people co-opted onto it. But then we know opposite. When it comes to transparency and the functioning of government, we had the former Minister for Home Affairs who didn't know that he was the co-minister. We had the Minister for Health who didn't know that there was another one. The Minister for Energy, Science and Industry who didn't know there was another one. We had programs set up to fund industry and manufacturing where the final decision-maker wasn't actually the minister, it was the Prime Minister. I tell you what is occurring now and what those opposite mightn't recognise. We have a proper cabinet government. A proper cabinet government that has cohort comments from ministers, that doesn't have PowerPoint presentations from Crosby Textor, doesn't have PowerPoint presentations, that has proper deliberations that result in outcomes that are then released through legislation. They are the processes that we have. They are in place. And for those opposite, when the minister raised a very clear statement about what occurred, the minister transferred her shares that she owned to her husband. Seriously.
Order.
You are ensuring
the Prime Minister's time has concluded. We'll give the call to the member for Hasluck.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. Australia faces a shortage of workers, particularly women, with experience in science, technology, engineering and mathematics. What is the government doing to increase the diversity of Australians participating in STEM to ensure a better economic future for all Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Hasluck, because, like many of us on this side, we know that we need modern skills for a modern economy. We've had, in particular through the course of the pandemic, a realisation that technology was required by a lot of businesses to keep those businesses running through the course of the pandemic and beyond. And we do need to find ways to build stronger businesses, more secure work, much more well-paying, and to be able to see a lot of that and that productivity occur through an investment in skills. We also know that countries beyond our shores are investing in technology big time because they know what this is doing for their economies and for their communities. And so the big thing from our perspective as an incoming government is to be able to provide the support to industry. We've got, in particular, our flagship program, the National Reconstruction Fund, that will transform and strengthen industries and look at longer-term growth for the economy and, importantly, provide a platform for employment growth. But we're also having to deal with a few things on coming into government that are holding back the economy. Notably, we've had this decade-long skills shortages affecting science and technology and the type of skills that are required by modern businesses. And so what we are looking at through the course of the Jobs and Skills Summit is how do you ensure that we have those investments, like, for example, what the Minister for Skills indicated earlier, our investments in TAFE and the like, and bringing forward those TAFE fee-free places, making sure that we have that pipeline of talent come in from school, either through vocational educational universities, making sure, as the Minister for Home Affairs says, we can tap into global talent and bring those to supplement within the economy. But the other big thing is, with the amount of work that we need to do in this space and to address those skill shortages, we need to be able to call on talents from all corners of the community. For the people that had the doors shut on them because people didn't have the faith in their ability, we need to open those doors up. We need to provide the skills and training and make sure that women, First Nations people, migrant, older workers, those with a disability, that they all have a chance to participate. And the great thing that came out of the Jobs and Skills Summit last week, when you heard representatives from business, but particularly from the tech sector, is saying that they do want to engage in this area. They do want to provide those open pathways. So we will open up a review in terms of all the STEM programs that exist across government, particularly in my own, to see what we can do, the programs that are working well, scale them up, the ones that aren't, fold them in, and make sure that we've got the processes in place to widen opportunity. That is what's going to be important longer term for this economy, tapping into human capital, skill, to drive that growth, strengthen businesses, and we want a lot more Australians to play a part in that very important endeavour.
Call the Prime Minister.
I ask further questions to be placed on the notice paper.